Support for this episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlock Holmes scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. And by listeners like you who choose to support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Find out more at patreon.com/trifles. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the circle was red, the study was scarlet, and the Scot was glorious, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about the giant rat of Sumatra, the remarkable worm unknown to science, or the repulsive story of the red leech?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 363, The 12 Trifles of Christmas. Hello, and I guess I should say compliments of the season. This is Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, Carol of the Bells to you. Happy Hanukkah, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all of that. We're in the season.
You know, I love Carol of the Bells. Every time I go out for coffee with her, I always hear her for a few minutes before she actually comes into the restaurant. It's a lot of anticipation.
Carol of the Bells and her sister, Merry Christmas.
No, that's Mary, Queen of Scots.
You are
what
Mary,
a
Queen
head
of
that
Scots.
woman has on her
Oh,
shoulders.
boy. Wow. Well, lest we get ourselves headed into any trouble, let's just cut it off at the pass here and say this is our celebratory episode of the season where we are, we're blessed with a gift from a listener. Jim Zych, right here in Michigan, sent an email our way with something he shared with the Ribston Pippins, one of the local groups here, just celebrated its 35th anniversary, about the 12 Sherlockian Days of Christmas. And as we were looking over them, we realized, well, these are trifles. And in keeping with the spirit of the holidays, we thought we might share it with you. So if you would like to get the show notes for this episode, they're available on our website at SherlockHolmesPodcast.com or right there in the app that you happen to be using to listen to us. If you don't subscribe to us or follow us on whichever place you listen to us, please do. It would be helpful for you to get regular updates when we put them out. Of course, our episodes come out every Wednesday without fail. For 7 years now, we've been doing this. I'm getting ready to round the corner and head into 2024. If you'd like to support the show, we have a community of growing supporters on Patreon. It's at patreon.com/trifles. Or again, the link is right in the show notes. For as little as $1 a month, you can be part of this community that has discussions and offers suggestions and at different levels even has rewards. So check that out and see what works for you. Well, you know, Bert, the 12 days of Christmas are technically supposed to start on Christmas. And this episode drops 12 days before Christmas. So I thought, well, seeing that we're talking about 12 Sherlockian Days of Christmas, it would be a great lead up to the actual holiday. Are you okay with that timeline?
Well, I don't argue with, far be it from me to argue with that timeline, but isn't it better if we just ask our listeners to adopt a cautionary posture here and not open this episode until Christmas?
Oh, that's not a bad idea. Or not open any episode for that matter. Well, For those not familiar, and I can't imagine there isn't anyone who doesn't have this earwig in their head, the 12 Days of Christmas is a traditional English Christmas carol, and it starts on the first day of Christmas, ultimately works up to day 12, and the reason, at least the reason I find it so cloying and annoying, is because it is what's called a cumulative song. And the lyrics build up, and you are asked to repeat each lyric in each successive lyric. So by the time you get to 12, you are once again enumerating every single day and every single gift that came your way. We are not about to subject you to that. So just out of an abundance of caution, because we do value our listeners. But so just some history about the word. It was the carol. I think it was originally published in the late 1700s. It's credited to Frederick Austin. It was a traditional song, and then additions were added to it. Additional lyrics were added to it by Frederick Austin, which I hadn't realized before. He published his edition in 1909, and that's the current version of the carol that we all know and loathe. I guess.
Well, I wouldn't say loathe. I think it's sort of a fun thing. I hadn't paid any attention at all to the history of it, and thanks to Wikipedia, I now know that the earliest known publication of the words to the 12 Days of Christmas were an illustrated children's book, Mirth Without Mischief, published in 1780, and a broadsheet by Angus of Newcastle, dated to the late 18th or early 19th century.
Mirth Without Mischief. We should publish Mischief Without Mirth.
Fascinating, interesting, and there's an enormous spreadsheet on Wikipedia that will tell you the variations in the words by addition, beginning in 1780. And then 1840, 42, 46, 53, 55, how the words have changed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way up to 1966.
Goodness.
Because sometimes, it was, sometimes the first thing was a partridge in a pear tree, but occasionally that changed to a juniper tree or some part of a juniper tree or the sprig of a juniper tree or a very pretty peacock upon a pear tree. Fascinating. I had no idea.
Well, if you're giving me a juniper tree, I would imagine I'd walk away with some gin by the end of it. So
you're always looking, for the bright spot.
Yes.
In these bizarre presents.
Well, and of course, there have been variations on the humorous side that have happened from time to time. Of course, the Mackenzie brothers from the Great White North.
Oh, my goodness.
Dave Thomas and Rick. I think it's Rick Moranis.
Rick Moranis.
Yeah, they did the 12 Beers of Christmas. And then Alan Sherman did the 12 Gifts of Christmas. That one I always remember. On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a Japanese transistor radio.
Yeah.
So people have had fun with it over the years. And I think there was one I remember from Dr. Demento called the 12 Pains of Christmas.
Oh.
Stringing up the lights. Oh, boy.
Well, what did Jim have to say about Sherlockian 12 Days of Christmas?
Well, thank goodness you rescued me from that, Bert. So he said he gave Holmes 1 year. Dr. Watson gave Holmes a Christmas based on research from their stories. And I thought, well, that's lovely, because to come up with one thing and two things, up to 12 things each successive day, those are each trifles, but together they create a wonderful cumulative set of gifts. So this is taken directly from the stories, And again, these things happened over 100 years ago, so they're not necessarily in the spirit of what we might expect today, but these are Watson's 12 Days of Christmas. And on the first day of Christmas, he gave Holmes one gilded frame containing a photo of Irena Adler, the woman, the one and only.
Yeah, very good. And, of course, the premise here of this bit is that Watson wanted to have some fun and reminisce. And so that's why he starts on the first day with the photo of Irene Adler. But on the second day of Christmas, he gives Holmes a 100-pound note and a half-crown, neither of which he could spend because they came from his 2 cases involving counterfeiting.
That's a good one. Now, which 2 cases would those have been?
Well, one is the engineer's thumb.
Yes.
The other one, I don't.
Probably the 3 Garadebs, I would imagine.
Right, the plates. Sure.
Bank plates, yeah. And on the third day of Christmas, we get a Christmas card signed by Nathan Garadeb, Howard Garadeb, and James Winter, a.k.a. John Garadeb, from the case of the 3 Garadebs. And Watson, unfortunately, had to forge Howard Garadeb's name because they were never able to find that 3rd Garadeb. No.
Well, and then on the 4th day, now I'm sure our listeners have tumbled to this. If you had on the 4th day of Christmas, what would you give Sherlock Holmes? A treasure map, of course, signed by Jonathan Small, Mahomet Singh, Abdullah Khan, and Dost Akbar, who collectively were the sign of the 4.
How appropriate. And on the 5th Sherlockian day of Christmas, we get 5 orange pips, which you, of course, know from the story. Which story was that from?
Oh, I think that was from that was the story that Watson called the 5 orange pips.
The 5 orange pips, yes. John Openshaw was fleeing his former gang members in the Ku Klux Klan. And this was the message they sent out to him to portend his death. We're now in the 4th quarter of the year, and the Baker Street Journal is going as strong as ever under editor Dan Andriacco. We've just seen the cover for the autumn issue, and it is a doozy. Full-color rendering of Professor Moriarty's head and shoulders from Sidney Paget's famous illustration. Now, that's not to say the professor had dandruff, far from it with his bald pate, but we see the details of Paget's genius close up. And that's what the Baker Street Journal allows us to do with all kinds of scholarship and creative writing, to focus on the details of some aspect or another of Sherlock Holmes and his world, just like we do here on Trifles. If you haven't gotten a subscription for 2023, it's not too late. You can still subscribe, get all of the issues to date, and be signed up for the Christmas Annual. Just go to BakerStreetIrregulars.com and subscribe to the BSJ today.
And the sixth day of Christmas is another one of these sort of dead giveaways. You got sign of 4 or 5 orange pips. What could be better than for Holmes to receive from Watson on the 6th day of Christmas 6 plaster casts of Napoleon?
Now, that was an auspicious day at Baker Street, the 6th day of Christmas, because later that day, Holmes would spend the day breaking each one of the Napoleons open. And, I'm not able to do the back of the envelope math, but I'm thinking, after he didn't find the pearl in the first one, didn't find the pearl in the second one, I'm thinking of the Monty Hall problem, where if he switched which one he was going to smash next, if his odds changed based on that. It's a famous math problem. But anyway, we would hope that Holmes got to the pearl before having to smash the last Napoleon, so he would still have one to display on the mantle there. Well, 7, the number 7 in the Sherlock Holmes stories can be only one thing, a 7% solution. So Watson gave him a vial marked as a 7% solution of cocaine, but filled it with just water. Because
Good thinking.
he was concerned about his friend's health after all.
Good thinking. And then on the 8th day of Christmas, Watson gave Holmes 8 books, one each of the 4 novels and a copy of The Adventures, The Return, The Memoirs, and The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. I wonder if Watson signed each one of those books for Sherlock Holmes and where they are today.
Yeah, that's a good question. And if he got in trouble with the Arthur Conan Doyle estate for sharing them out of copyright. Hopefully not. Now, here's a conundrum. We'll have to pick this one apart. On the 9th day of Christmas, Watson gave Holmes 9 police badges commemorating the 9 cases where Scotland Yard inspectors brought a case to Sherlock Holmes to help solve. Now, do you want to go who or what? I'm trying to figure out how we should approach this one. 9 cases.
Well, we really have to tip our hat here to Jim, who provided this to us. But you could go.
Come on, you're pulling back the curtain here. I want.
No, you could go chronologically, and start with Study in Scarlet, because that was a case that was brought. So that's 1 right there, and that came from Lestrade and Gregson. But to count the 9, that gives us 1 case.
Yes. And Lestrade was not done in dealing with Sherlock Holmes. He brought 3 more cases to Holmes. And in order, they were the Boscombe Valley Mystery, the Cardboard Box, which was really a conundrum for him, and just as we were talking about, the 6 Napoleons.
So that's 4 out of the 9.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got good old Alec MacDonald from the Valley of Fear. So that takes us up to 5.
Okay. And when we get to near the end of the count, the retired colorman, that was one that was brought in by Inspector Forrester. There's one we don't spend a lot of time on, but that's one worth noting as well.
And then we've got good old Stanley Hopkins. So now we are at, this is 9 police badges, so we're at 6 so far. Study in Scarlet, Cardboard Box, 6 Napoleons, Boscombe Valley Mystery, Valley of Fear, Retired Colorman is 6. So Stanley Hopkins brings us Black Peter. That gets us up to 7.
And Hopkins is one of these that made repeat appearances. He also brought Holmes The Adventure of the Abbey Grange. Eustace Brackenstall lying dead there in the middle of the night.
And then finally, good old Stanley Hopkins brings Sherlock Holmes The Golden Pince-Nez.
The Golden Pince-Nez. Now, it's interesting as we look at all of these together. I'm interested in those 3 from Hopkins, all happening within the confines of the return of Sherlock Holmes. And then we add another one from that collection, the 6 Napoleons, where Lestrade was there. That's 4 out of the dozen cases. 1/3 of the cases in the return were referred to Holmes not by a client themselves, but by a police inspector. So, interesting.
Yeah, very good.
At the height of his powers.
And then we get up to number 10. And what group of 10 items might Watson be giving Sherlock Holmes to reminisce from his cases?
Oh, I've got it. Bowling pins. No.
Elementary, my dear one.
No.
Yes, your hook is deserting you. No, it's thank you cards. Thank you cards from the women in the Sherlock Holmes cases, all of whom had one thing in common. they all had, sadly, no one else to turn to. So who fits, in your mind, who fits that description in the canon?
Oh, well, goodness. Mary Morstan, certainly, right at the early part of the canon there. She had no living relatives. She was living with Mrs. Forrester. And this mystery needed to be solved regarding these pearls that kept arriving upon the anniversary of the death of her father. So she was fairly helpless.
Yeah, she was. And then, of course, Helen Stoner from the Speckled Band.
Yeah, there's another one, deathly afraid of her stepfather. Well, the in the Copper Beeches, we've got Violet.
Well, we have Violet
Smith.
Hunter. Violet Hunter. From the
Violet
Copper
Hunter
Beeches.
is the Copper Beeches. Yeah,
Indeed.
I'm looking at the list. There was a mix-up there. Violet Hunter, wrote a letter to Holmes asking for his advice. She didn't have anyone else to ask. And Holmes had bemoaned becoming a source of helping people find lost lead pencils and the like. But it ended up being one of his better cases.
Yeah, she was all alone in the world and nobody to help her. And then, of course, another Violet, Violet Smith.
Yes.
In this case of the solitary cyclist.
Yeah, it was due to the death of her uncle that she was kind of alone in the world and an heiress. The poor and helpless typist, the nearsighted typist, Mary Sutherland, who was she was forlorn and her heart was broken, and she was being scammed by her stepfather.
Well, and then there's another woman who sought out Mary Watson for help. That's Mrs. Neville St. Clair from The Man with the Twisted Lip.
Yeah, that was a good one. And Mrs. Warren in The Adventure of the Red Circle. She was a landlady, and talking to her husband and some of her cronies, she was recommended to Mr. Holmes as well.
Yes. So now let's see, Helen Stoner, Mary Morstan, Violet Hunter, Violet Smith, Mary Sutherland, Mrs. Neville St. Clair. So now we're up to seven, so we have three more to go. Well, one of the obvious ones would be poor old, I'm sure as soon as she recovered from the effects of chloroform, she wrote a thank you card to Sherlock Holmes' Lady Frances Carfax.
Yeah. And from Charles Augustus Milverton, it was Lady Eva Blackwell who had initially come to Holmes. Let's hope that she was a little more careful in her correspondence to Sherlock Holmes when she sent that thank you note.
Yes, and then Annie Harrison from the Naval Treaty. So Watson has come up with a good group of 10 thank you cards that should have cheered Holmes up a little bit on Christmas.
Yeah, and do we think that Annie Harrison would have appreciated knowing about her brother? That's a tough one. I'd never stopped to consider that.
Yeah, well, that's true.
And did she find out that it was him ever?
Oh, I'm sure she did, yeah. His absence would have been hard to conceal from her.
She could have played dumb for a while, but that was it. So that gets us to the 11th day of Christmas. What do we have on the 11th day?
Well, this is a really clever one, I think. It's 11 shillings and sixpence. And so we can pause for a second and ask our listeners, gee, do you know what that refers to? 11 shillings and sixpence.
11 shillings and sixpence. Was it a bill from one of the hotels or a restaurant?
It was something that got in the way of your staying at a hotel or going to a restaurant. It was Watson's paltry daily army pension, 11 shillings and sixpence, that drove him to Baker Street in the company of Sherlock Holmes.
There we go. And finally, we have the 12th day of Christmas, the the day after which the song is named. And that gets us to a dozen dirty and ragged little street Arabs who were posed in a photo on the steps of 221B Baker Street. That's right, these are the irregulars. So, well, I don't know if they added one to their group for the 13th day. It could have been a baker's dozen of
Baker Street dozen.
Dirty and ragged little irregulars. But it's an inventive list and a fine way for us to tally some of the things that happened in the canon. It's a wonderful reflection, I think, at this time of the year. And a way for us to share some of those very minute trifles with all of you on this occasion. We've got 2 more episodes before we wrap season 7 here. And we are looking forward to sharing those with you.
And that is not a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Of course, we have kept the feathers, legs, crop, and so on of your own bird, if you so wish. They might be useful to me as relics of my adventure, but beyond that, I can hardly see what use the disjecta membra of my old acquaintance could possibly be to me. Oh, no, so with your permission, I shall confine my attentions to the excellent bird which I perceive upon your sideboard.